I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk, now!
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Watch. It's Chris. No Angie today, so I had three separate guests on. First, I'm joined by Alison and Herman to talk about John Mulaney's new Netflix special, Kid Gorgeous, at Radio City Music Hall, and also to discuss a little bit of one of my personal favorites, and favorites for anybody who calls themselves a Bransky, The Good Fight on CBS All Access. And then I was joined by Amanda Dobbins to talk about probably one of the revelations of the TV year, and it's basically the most underrated show of the year, if you ask me. It's Howard's End, which is currently airing on Starz, or was airing on Starz. I believe it wrapped up its 4-episode run this past Sunday. It's written by Kenneth Lonergan, who wrote Manchester by the Sea, who wrote Margaret, who wrote You Can Count on Me, as an accomplished playwright, obviously. So people might be familiar with his work stateside, but he wrote this adaptation of E.M. Forster's classic novel, Howard's End, and it stars Haley Atwell, who you may have seen as Agent Carter in some of the Avengers stuff, Captain America stuff, and also in Be Right Back, the Black Mirror episode. Guys, this show is an absolute miracle. I can't recommend it more highly. So I talked to Amanda about that. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about some stuff happening on The Ringer. Related to TV, I'd love for you to check out Alison Herman's Mulaney feature, which is sort of the basis of our conversation. She talked to John Mulaney a couple of weeks back and talked to him about his special. That went up earlier this week. We still have tons of Infinity War stuff, and you can read Micah Peters' piece on Thanos, which I thought was really good, but there's no end. There's an almost infinite amount of Infinity War stuff to read. Podcast-wise, please check out The Recapables Atlanta and Westworld The Recapables. The Westworld Recapables is hosted by David Shoemaker, and you can listen to those Sunday night after Westworld airs. And Recapables Atlanta is hosted by Amanda Dobbins, our guest today on The Watch, and that's a great podcast as Atlanta wraps up its second season. Please also subscribe and listen to The Dave Chang Show. It is David Chang's podcast with the Ringer Podcast Network. The first episode documented the opening of the Los Angeles restaurant Major Domo. It's a great podcast for you if you care about food, business, art, anything. Really, it's like all these different things converging in one podcast, and that's a really excellent new show that we're super excited about. So please subscribe to The Dave Chang Show. Today, also, I am joined by Deon Taylor, a really interesting filmmaker who made a movie called Traffik that came out a few weeks back, starring Paula Patton and Omar Epps. It is a social twist on a thriller. It's hard to explain this movie because it has a couple of different layers. On one hand, it's basically we're being hunted by scary people Hitchcock movie. On the other hand, it's kind of got a different message about human trafficking and sort of the darkness that lies just beyond the suburban American dream. So Deon came in, he talked to us a little bit about Traffik and a little bit about future projects that he might have in store. So that was a cool conversation. You should stick around for that at the end of the show. Without further ado, here is Alison Herman to talk about Mulaney and The Good Fight. Alison, there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk to you about, especially Good Fight, because I feel like enough people are watching The Good Fight to get it a season 3 renewal. So thank God for that. Sometimes when I watch The Good Fight, I see all the actors who are appearing on, and I'm like, this must cost $1 billion, right? Alan Alda, like that. And maybe I have to adjust my idea of what Alan Alda costs.
My new conspiracy theory is that the Kings just show up in an unmarked van at the cast entrance to every off-Broadway theater and are like, get in here, we're going to Silver
Even if
Cup.
It's just Alan Alda going to a matinee. They're just like, Alda, come on. So we're going to talk a little bit about Good Fight. Amanda Dobbins is going to join me later to talk about Howard's End. But first I wanted to talk to you, Alison, about Netflix comedy, and specifically John Mulaney, because you wrote a great John Mulaney feature this week on theringer.com that people should check out.
Thank you.
And I watched Kid Gorgeous this week on Netflix. It came out.
Kid Gorgeous at Radio City Music Hall is
Kid
the
Gorgeous
full title.
at Radio City Music Hall. And I LOL'd. I like LOL'd to the point of tears.
Did you L your AO?
I did. It was just like I think I was not super familiar with Mulaney stand-up, and I read your piece, and I was really intrigued by one thing that you particularly focused on in there, which was this idea of technique, and that Mulaney was obsessed with technique. So for people who are not maybe stand-up aficionados, can you talk a little bit about what technique means specifically to Mulaney, but generally in stand-up?
Sure. I think Mulaney's stand-up is sort of instructive to look at in terms of what he doesn't do. So I think the archetype of the modern stand-up is, for better or for worse, maybe established by someone like Louis C.K. or Mark Maron, where
Confessional.
Very confessional. I could literally tell you ongoing problems in Mark Maron's current relationship based on the first 10 minutes of his podcast.
I know so much about East Side Los Angeles real estate right now.
Yeah, I know so much about the layout of his garage and how it's changed. But, you know, I think there's this sort of cliche that you take your experience and you channel it into what you say on stage, and that really helps you. Mulaney is not confessional at all. He's not very personal. He uses his wife and his father as recurring characters in his stand-up, but they're very clearly like characters with very specific attributes that he plays up. He's also not a particularly political comic. He's not someone like Samantha Bee, who's really been lifted up in the last couple of years because they're really good at putting their finger on something that a lot of people are feeling right now. And in a way, it's almost weird. Like, I would probably call him the best stand-up working right now. Comedy is subjective. I realize that's a somewhat controversial statement. I think maybe in their peak, someone like Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle was probably better. But in terms of like who is putting out stuff right now and at what quality is that stuff, I really think he is at the top of his game. But I wouldn't call him influential necessarily because he's so old school in his presentation. Like, he literally wears a suit on stage. He wanted to do a special at Radio City Music Hall. And the content of his jokes is very Seinfeldian observational. It's like, let me pick up on this very specific thing, and the thing that makes it good is my insight and the effort I put into it and the specific phrasing that I'm able to do because I have a brain that's really good at this stuff. And it's really interesting to see how he doesn't draw on anything except his own comedic talent.
I guess I'm a little bit more aware of things like that now after years of reading Splitsider, and like the sort of the art of comedy has become such a huge thing where it's like anything from the Aristocrats to just comedians in cars getting coffee. I feel like we talk a lot about the mechanics of comedy. And I felt like watching Mulaney, I noticed certain things, not necessarily about joke construction, which is still a little bit mysterious to me, but about performance that seemed incredibly studied. Now, you had seen the material that's in the Netflix special multiple times. You were telling me earlier in different capacities. Did you notice anything that rang true when you saw it in Los Angeles that then didn't wind up in the special, or is different in the special? Were there any editing processes that you seemed to witness him go through to get to the final product?
Yeah, it's funny. There were definitely like new bits in the special, like the password thing that he did on SNL. I remember seeing it on SNL and being like, oh, like that's new. And then it ends up in the special. I saw him do a full hour at Orpheum that was like a full produced thing. And actually a couple years ago when he was just like, you know, warming up, getting his reps in Los Angeles, I saw him at a show called The Meltdown that's no longer around, but I saw him do like a quick 20. And that performance was actually really interesting because he told a really interesting story about how before his pilot didn't get picked up by NBC, he was waiting for it to get picked up by Fox, and he took a job writing for an NFL commercial and like a video game commercial, which is really funny because
Madden or something like that.
Yeah,
okay.
like yes, it was Madden, and it was one of those things where like the joke is very obvious. He's this like skinny guy who's clearly not that into sports and makes a lot of jokes about how he's not conventionally masculine.
Right.
But one of the people who was on set there was Ray Lewis.
Oh my God.
And he didn't know who Ray Lewis was. And he said, for those of you who don't know, and that just that line alone got a laugh, but he said, like, in 2000, Ray Lewis and a couple buddies were within murdering distance of a man who was murdered. Right? I saw that 2 years ago, and I still remember that exact combination of words because it's so good.
Yeah.
Like, he's just so good at, you know, you say you don't notice technique, but I feel like I almost can't help but notice it. It's also his stand-up is very written. Like, as a writer, I feel like I can see his jokes, like, appear on the page as I hear them. And there are certain comedians, I think John Early and Kate Berlin are a lot like this, where if you see their material written down, it's not necessarily that funny. It's like,
it's all in the performance.
It's all in how they present it, and
they're from Search Party. In case people, they're you can see their work in Search Party
and 555 on Vimeo.
Okay,
and Mulaney, I don't want to discount his performance. He's got great stage presence, but a lot of his material like is crafted in the actual phrasing and combination of words, and I feel like that's kind of catnip to someone like me who writes for a living. But I also think you can see his talent that way.
So he's a little bit of a formalist. So he's like taking a certain thing. I mean, he's like trying to add like this kind of almost invisible ink to the way that we would normally perceive a joke. He's doing it, but he's just doing it at a slightly higher level that than maybe we're used to with like your standard stand-up.
Yeah, and he doesn't lean on certain, I wouldn't call them crutches, but he doesn't pull from like his own biography. And part of that is, he grew up comfortably in Chicago, went to a nice college, succeeded justifiably like very soon afterward. He was hired as a writer at SNL when he was 25, which was very intimidating. And again, entirely deserved. But there's not as much like, oh, I had like a lost decade where I did a lot of crazy stuff and pulled a lot of stunts.
Sure.
Let me like pull from those stories. It's almost entirely on the force of his own technique.
Do you think that, what is it about Netflix that makes it such a vibrant place for stand-up right now? Is it something about, like, because you and I have had conversations around the office, and I think sometimes, if you don't mind me saying so, you have a little bit of, you're like, I'm a little disappointed because I feel like people give things on Netflix a chance that they wouldn't ordinarily give a chance to something like where it's like, oh, Quarry, which is buried on Cinemax and you can't find it. But like on Netflix, it's like I'm sitting around, I turn on Netflix, and whatever they show me, I will give a shot because the barrier of entry, the actual act that I have to perform is so minimal that I'm open to more things. So what makes people open to stand-up on Netflix?
I mean, Netflix has like a de facto monopoly on stand-up right now. I think more so even than in scripted series. Like HBO puts some stuff out, Epix puts some stuff out, but the percentage of notable stand-up products that come from Netflix versus other places is like really staggering. I also think like this particular period right now is probably like May is maybe the densest month of like notable output there that I've seen since like earlier in the year they had Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock within like a month of each other,
Sure.
which is obviously huge. But like this month alone, it's John Mulaney, Hari Kondabolu, whose profile has been raised by some public
Simpsons stuff, yeah.
back and forth with the Simpsons. Yeah, Ali Wong, Tig Notaro, and Steve Martin and Martin Short. Like
That's
in a
crazy,
month.
yeah.
That's just baffling.
Yeah.
And they really, stand-up is a common entryway for outlets like HBO and Showtime
Right,
to
because it's
get
low
their foot.
overhead to get lots of
Exactly.
content, right?
And Netflix like established that foothold and then turned it into a stranglehold. Like they just put out everything.
So do you think for Netflix, unlike say NBC, which would be the place that somebody like Mulaney talked in your piece about, for a lot of people the sitcom is the endpoint, but for me stand-up is the endpoint, and the sitcom like was almost to make me better at stand-up, right? I'm not sure if I'm paraphrasing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things about Mulaney's career is that he did what comedians are kind of supposed to do or supposed to want, where they use pre-existing TV writing and stand-up reputation, and then they're like, okay, I've graduated to the big leagues. It's time to do my own project. For some people, that's trying to become a movie star, the way Amy Schumer is right now. For some people, that's getting a talk show. For some people, that's becoming like a auteur filmmaker type, the way Aziz Ansari did with Master of None. And Mulaney decided to use that capital to do an old school multicam self-titled network sitcom about a stand-up named John Mulaney that he saw as kind of ironically hailing back to Seinfeld, but at the time it was just like drubbed in the reviews.
Sure.
It was just considered a total failure. It didn't get good ratings. It didn't get good reviews. And he's been introspective about like the reasons why the show itself didn't work.
I actually kind of enjoyed it.
That's totally fair.
No, I mean, I think it's possibly because I didn't have any expectations. I wasn't like a huge Mulaney head, so I didn't really know what I was missing out on. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if that factored into it at the time. But, he did this thing, it didn't work out, and then, not entirely by choice, he went back to the thing that he is best at. And again, I think he's better at than basically anyone else who's working right now. And it's been really interesting to see him like lean into that style of performance as kind of the thing his career is. I don't want to, he should do whatever he wants. I can't speak to anything 5 to 10 years in the future, but like, it's really interesting to see someone treat stand-up as something that's worth being like the summit of their career.
Do you think it's possible that Netflix could start to replicate the old network model of taking some of their more popular stand-up products and trying to get a show out of Ali Wong?
Oh, I'm sure. I think, I could be wrong, but Ali Wong and Randall Park are going to be in a rom-com directed by Nahnatchka Khan, and I think that's going to be on Netflix.
Okay.
And Ali Wong is notable because she is the first stand-up star who was not acquired by Netflix for like millions and millions of dollars. It was Baby Cobra, which was released in 2016, was her first ever special. She literally had to sell Groupon tickets to fill theaters before it was recorded. And it was a huge hit. And she became like an overnight superstar. Again, totally deservedly. It's one of my favorite hours of comedy I've seen in years. And she has this new special coming out this month that I think is equally excellent. But that is an example of homegrown talent where Netflix has previously been very acquisitive. So I'm really curious to see where that relationship goes.
All right, from one streaming service, let's go to a lesser known one, which is
Great
CBS
segue.
All Access. Thanks. And a show that is very near and dear to our hearts, Good Fight. Now, big Good Wife fan?
Medium Good Wife fan.
Medium Good Wife fan.
I mean, first of all, in a very off-brand opinion for this podcast, we are both big fans of a show starring Christine Baranski.
So that's what this show is now. It's not a show that is starring Rose Leslie. Rose Leslie is like, who was the star of the first season, nominally the star of the first season. She played the daughter of a Bernie Madoff character, and it was I believe, a 10-episode first season.
Yeah, it was 10 episodes last season, and this season it's 13, and I think you can kind of feel the breathing.
And the narrative arc of the first season was largely about this woman, Maya Rundell, whose father was a Bernie Madoff character, and she is starting out her law career at Diane Lockhart's new firm, right?
Yeah, and it sort of mirrors The Good Wife, where The Good Wife opens with this public shame and embarrassment scandal of a woman's husband publicly cheating on her, and this one is Maya's father, who is also Diane's closest friend, is implicated in the scandal, robs Diane of her retirement savings, but because Diane is close to him, she can't get hired.
Sure.
She was about to go off to Provence,
enjoy
a lovely retirement. I hope she gets it someday. But then she decides to, or she has to go back to work, and she goes to a historically black law firm called Reddick Bozeman, which is that classic Robert and Michelle King nuanced, like the subtle commentary of a white lawyer only going to work at a black firm as a last resort, I think is so smart. A lot of what it's called The Good Fight because the firm focuses a little more on social justice. And
well, now
casework does.
I would say that Good Fight has become quite pronounced. If the first season was about this Madoff character and his daughter who was trying to make her way in law firm, this season is about Donald Trump. I mean, it's been about a couple of different things. There's a couple of different subplots, but as the second half of the season is unfolded, we are watching almost like liberal fan fiction, I think. And in some ways, it's like basically like a group therapy session played out as a legal drama where you have all these
catharsis.
Yes.
And we should mention that like literally the first shot of the series is Diane looking dumbfounded at the television while they announce that Donald Trump has won. I believe they were in production on the first season when the election happened. So Trump is incorporated into the first season, and they did a really admirable job of doing that. But this season, they clearly were able to plan. And now, like, the opening credits show a bunch of office supplies exploding, and like the TV shows shirtless Putin.
Yeah.
And I think
great
it's
opening
Trump.
credit sequence.
Fantastic. But this season is definitely like they do such a good job of Diane, the character, is like vocally frustrated in a way that
I would say beyond vocally frustrated. I don't want to give too much away because it is the kind of thing where you could actually not watch the first season if you wanted to catch up on the second season. It's not a particularly twist and plot driven show, but it is, I think, easily the most enjoyable 45 minutes to an hour that I spend watching television every week because uniformly the ensemble is so great. The performances are so great. The writing is like of an expert caliber. There's like these A, B, C, and D plots that sometimes can be daffy and irreverent and sometimes can be quite moving. And I can't like there's nobody bad on the show. It's just like I'm interested in every single character. And they're talking about like, should we prosecute Donald Trump's impeachment? And let's talk about the P tape on any given week.
Yep, totally. I mean, I just think, again, it like really mirrors this feeling of liberal frustration, but also like The Good Wife always dealt with politics. Mm-hmm. And I had a really interesting Twitter exchange with Alan Sepinwall, actually, where he said, I think they do a good job. It just makes me like a little less enthusiastic to watch every week, sort of like, not to the same degree, but kind of like what you guys were saying about The Handmaid's Tale, where it's just like, I just don't want to see my reality reflected this much. But I actually disagree there because it totally fits in the King's wheelhouse. Yeah. Like their last show before this, I really enjoyed it. And unfortunately didn't work out. But it was a show called Brain Dead, where it was like alien bugs invade Washington, D.C.
That didn't really pop off. Yeah.
Didn't pop off, but it was also like this is clearly a subject that they are invested in and have been for a long time. It's not like a show awkwardly trying to shoehorn like the way we talk about things now, all caps, into the plot. Like, there are characters on the show who work in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah,
like,
also, it's anything but miserable. I mean, they still wear like absolutely amazing clothes, and they actually have a ton of fun with each other, and it is kind of amazing. I mean, we were talking a little bit about Mulaney kind of trying to upend the stand-up driven sitcom years ago. This is a glossy CBS, more or less legal procedural with tons of cursing.
A legal procedural.
Yeah, with tons of swearing and like drug taking and weird moments. So I mean, it's the barrier to get to it. You have to like sign up for CBS All Access and watch it that way. But I really recommend this show for anybody who's looking for like a slightly different twist on the network procedural.
Well, and that was actually the piece I wrote about The Good Fight earlier in the season. Was I got really frustrated watching Jessica Jones, thinking like, you know, it's missing something.
Yeah.
And the thing I thought it was missing was like a procedural element, because the main character is literally detective. And the counterexample I found was, you know, the Kings have always been very defensive of the quality of network shows and procedurals and the procedural format vis-a-vis something like Breaking Bad or
Sure.
That was actually like Mulaney in our interview was like, what the Good Fight does is harder than what Vince Gilligan had
Really?
to do. Yeah, we were talking about how hard it is to make things on a network schedule.
Sure.
But they're now on like sort of network, sort of streaming.
Yeah.
They have an abbreviated episode count. They can swear, obviously. They can have slightly longer episodes that go up to like 55 minutes as opposed to like a tight 47. And they have this freedom and they make use of it, but they clearly enjoy what they're able to do with these short-term plots so much that they choose to still use them. And I think that's a great choice and a really instructive one.
And there's Baranski.
All
right, so Good Fight, we highly recommend. We also recommend Kid Gorgeous live at Radio City on Netflix. Allison, thank you so much for stopping by. Now I'm joined by a very special guest, one of my favorite podcast personalities.
Oh, that's so
the
kind
host
of you to say.
Recapables Atlanta and Jam Session, Amanda Dobbins.
Chris, hello.
Hi. I want to talk about Howard's End.
I've been waiting all week for this.
Well, because you and Juliet were very insistent that I check it out.
Yes.
And
can I just say that you were interested in this for a long time?
Well, I'm a Lonergan guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Kenneth Lonergan adapted E.M. Forster's classic.
Yes.
When did the novel come out?
I don't know. I'm not Wikipedia.
Late 19th? Early 20th?
I would say early 20th, I would say.
And, you know, obviously it's a Merchant Ivory film. It was an award-winning Merchant Ivory film with Emma Thompson, an iconic performance by Emma Thompson. So there was a little bit of like, how can you improve on that?
Yes.
I don't know if they're different things, but I am bowled over by how good this is.
I have been yelling at you since it debuted about how fantastic it is. And it's funny, the original Howard's End, the movie starring Emma Thompson, is currently on Netflix. So I went back to rewatch it. And that's something I grew up on the Merchant Ivory films. They are near and dear to me. And I went back to compare and contrast. And you're right, it's completely different. And the thing about this new adaptation that is so exciting is just how much energy there is. It's really, really alive. Yeah. Everything from the performances by Haley Atwell, who I want to marry her. That's really the only way that I can succinctly express the depth of my appreciation for her performance. And Philippa Coulthard, who, I'm sorry if I said her name wrong, but you are hosting this.
Yeah, I'm fine.
So, who plays her sister Helen, but everything the way it's shot, the scenery, I think the score by Nico Muhly is fantastic and really invigorating.
Gorgeous music. Yeah.
And it's just, you're used to these type of I'm used to these type of adaptations being stately and soothing and there's a comfort in that, and I love them for it, but this is such a exciting.
It's intellectually ferocious.
Yes.
Like that's the thing that I find it so stimulating. Because it's
you sound like Haley Atwell right now.
No.
I mean, stimulating is literally the best, the most exciting, the best adjective that you can use on Howard's End. It's like, it was so stimulating, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, but I think I expected what you're talking about. That stately kind of masterpiece theater, but like with a higher end production value. Not only do I find it intellectually stimulating from like what they're talking about level, but like the depiction of London is so awesome and just involving because it actually feels like it's so economical the way they're like, probably don't have the budget to like shut down Trafalgar Square, but we can take this one little part of Sloane Square and like shoot it so that you can't see the J. Crew, but we can still have the park that's been there since Dickens.
Yeah.
And then like the investigation into Leonard's sort of like the early like tower blocks that Leonard was living in, and all these characters and this huge spectrum of life, both inside and outside of London, is absolutely stunning. It's epic in a way that isn't Lawrence of Arabia epic, but it's sweeping, you know?
I have to say they really also, the budget that they have, they spend really well.
On shawls.
The shawls, the shirts, the house where they live, that's kind of, I mean, there's obviously the
Wickham
house of
Place,
Howard's End and then Wickham Place, and the two actual physical locations play a character in this film. So it's good that they spent money on them, but boy, did they spend the right money. I mean, I want to live in those rooms. Yeah. And then they're doing small things like there's a plaid shirt that Haley Atwell's character wears in one episode, and then Helen, her sister, is wearing in the next episode. So they're paying attention to these details, which has always been a hallmark of these shows. But I appreciate it. Not everyone gets those right.
So is there something that Lonergan is doing with the source material? Because I've never read the novel, but do you know if he's like going back to the book? Is there an expansion of this beyond what was in the Merchant Ivory film? I don't necessarily.
No, I think it's pretty close. And what's funny is that I have read Zadie Smith's On Beauty more recently than I have read Howard's End. Okay. And On Beauty was was an adaptation. I don't know if adaptation is quite the word, but she definitely uses Howard's End.
Okay.
Pretty closely, and she takes scenes and kind of rearranges them like a
postmodern collage kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. But there are certain scenes where you can kind of go one-to-one. So
oh,
it's very
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's like Exile in Guyville and Exile in Main Street, kind of those favorite things. Yeah.
So I have to confess, I couldn't really speak super intelligently about what Lonergan left out of the book. Yeah. I think the thing that he's doing here that's so different from these types of adaptations is like the dialogue is really so... It's crackling. It's
Sorkin-y. I mean, in terms of like overlapping long-term monologues that both diverge and then come back together in another room where it's like it's quite excellent, and it feels different because like sometimes these things feel very stagey. Right. Even the newsroom, like you're watching the newsroom, you're like, oh, this is just like a play that they're putting on a newsroom. Right. But this feels very exciting because I think sometimes, and we talked about this before, it's like TV kind of like is shitting the bed in some of the possibilities that it has. Yeah. If you're allowed to do anything, quote unquote, on TV, like why not try to be as smart and thoughtful as possible in some places? And it's like, why is this show so much more smart and thoughtful than half of what I see on television?
I think it's also, I'm going to sound like a broken record of myself here, but it's only 4 episodes. It's 4 hours. Yeah. They decided to do quality instead of quantity, which I think goes a long way. And there's also a thing that I sense in this as a person who has watched more than her fair share of BBC miniseries and Merchant Ivory and all of these costume dramas. There is a real affection for the genre while still wanting to update it and make it feel of the moment. And there aren't that many people trying to do that with this particular genre to really make it be the best that it can be in 2018 and use all our resources. So.
I do want to take a specialist before we go, a quick second to shout out Haley Atwell because, first of all, an actress I love anyway. Yes. In my favorite episode of Black Mirror, Be Right Back. But when this first aired, the interviews I was seeing were basically like, how do you feel even trying to like lift the hem of Emma Thompson's garment? Like, what are you even thinking? Basically, it was just like, this is crazy. Like, this is Emma Thompson's signature role, one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have to be it's not a zero-sum game, but she's so good in this. Yeah. She is dazzling in this show.
She's dazzling. There's Alison Herman, who you were just speaking to. She wrote a piece at my request because I love this show so much, which I thank you, Alison, for doing that. The piece was very lovely. And also the word that she used was electric, which is exactly right. The Emma Thompson thing is interesting. I'm going to nerd out with you for a second.
Go for it. You're in the right place.
I believe in the mid-2000s, Emma Thompson and Haley Atwell starred in a movie together, and it was a remake of Brideshead Revisited.
Right.
And Brideshead Revisited is another this is funny actually. It's kind of, that's a BBC miniseries from the 80s that is like a really hallowed.
Oh yeah, people adore that one.
I mean, that one is.
I think my mom watches it like once every year.
Yeah, it's kind of the peak of the genre, and so there was a little bit of like, how dare you remake this for both of them, and they co-starred in together. It's not great, even though it has Matthew Good as well. And I think the reason that it doesn't work, I was also rewatching it fairly recently because I'm me. It has no energy. It's really dour. It takes kind of all the worst lessons of it. Obviously, it's also about Catholicism, so like, there's not much you can do about dourness at some point.
Right.
But I think Emma Thompson and Haley Atwell actually really share a certain vivacity, for lack of a better word. And I don't really see it as stepping on Emma Thompson's territory as much as kind of, I think she's a natural heir. It's great casting.
Yeah, she's someone I just don't think like I have gotten to see enough in other stuff. You know, it's like she kind of got the most people here probably know her as Agent Carter. And I just can't recommend you watch Howard's End enough. It is like 4 hours, really, really, really well spent.
It's someone getting the chance to do exactly what they were meant to do.
Yeah,
it's great.
That's a really good way of putting it. All right, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Deon Taylor, director of Traffik, writer and director of Traffik. Deon, I've seen a couple interviews where you talked about the germ of what, like the idea of why you wanted to make a movie about what you made a movie about.
Right.
But I was wondering, because you were just talking about being from the Sacramento area, what was there like a house you drove by? Was there a road you drove down that said, this is kind of creepy? What we need is a thriller here. Like, what was the setting? What triggered the setting idea?
No, man. Actually, it's a really, really crazy story. But actually, just as a regular guy, I would have never made a movie like this.
Really?
I mean, because I wasn't aware of what it was. I mean, I like everyone, you see it, you hear it. But you kind of just keep walking and, doing whatever you do in your life until something affects you.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is my daughter's school sent us an email that we received that was like, kids are being trafficked at the local mall. And I just remember looking at it going like, what?
How is this real? Yeah.
What was the first time I've ever seen that written?
Yeah.
And, I mean, just as an African-American man, I mean, you deal with so much anyway in the home with your child. Like you're constantly talking about whatever it is, the topic of the day. Well, any parent does, right?
Yeah.
But this was like foreign to me. I had never seen that. And I was like, well, they don't want us, right?
Yeah.
That's the international thing. And I was shocked, man. I was just blown away when I went online and started reading the statistics and understanding that, young kids, African-American kids, Latino kids and adults are, pretty much number one domestically in terms of being trafficked. And that blew my mind. Because, you think like, oh, this is...
So that happens in like Eastern Europe maybe or something
wherever,
like that.
right?
Yeah, right.
You seen Taken, right? So
yeah,
you're
right.
like, oh, this
right.
over there, right? So,
right.
And that haunted me. And then what happened was once that triggered me, every time I looked at the TV, it was something on there about trafficking.
Something like
on the
kidnapping,
bottom of
yeah,
CNN
right.
or whatever. And I said, man, this is crazy. And that sparked the idea. And then headlines were all available to me where I'm like, man, look at this, and started looking at rings. And I eventually was like, oh, I got a really good idea how to build this. And, unlike a horror movie where you would go see, a really dope Blumhouse movie where you're like, oh, this is, The Monster, this is The Purge, and on this night, it was not that. It was like, okay, we'll build a thriller/horror film, but we'll have a real topic as the thing that is going to be the undertow.
So did you set it in that area outside of Sacramento because that was the area you were most familiar with, or was there something about that felt like on the surface?
Well, what I was most intrigued about was that area was one of a highlighted run.
Yeah.
So where I'm at in Northern California, which is a beautiful place, man. I mean, it's just like I said, you drive to Tahoe, you never think anything of it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is beautiful, but this is one of the runs that they use coming out of the Bay Area up towards that way to Reno. And I started reading stories about that area, and I was like, man, that's right there.
Right.
And I've driven that road a million times, so I said, okay, this is where I'm going to base the story at.
So you're obviously somebody who loves movies.
Yes.
You're writing a movie that's that's, you know, it has these echoes of Hitchcock. It has these echoes of horror movies. It has these echoes of like some of the 90s thrillers I'm sure we probably grew up with. Like, at what point in the screenwriting process and at what point when you're making this movie, how do you balance some of the social messaging that you want to put in there about like this issue, but also like maintain this like edge of your seat stuff that's going on? Because, you know, the first 40 minutes up through their dinner, you know, is pretty, and I don't want to give anything too big away in terms of twists, because people obviously got to see the movie, but we get through the first act and a half of the movie and it's pretty, you're like, okay, this is pretty straightforward. How are you balancing those two things that you're trying to do?
This was a really tough film. I think, you know, what's interesting about this movie is when I went to go research and watch and say, okay, sometimes you can go and say, oh, I'm gonna make a movie like this. This movie hadn't been made. So for me, I'm like, all right, how do you
pitch that?
How do you pitch it? And how do you build it? And at what point do you turn the audience where they're like, oh my God, what just happened? Because that's what's happening. And I decided in the beginning it would be straightforward. I decided in the beginning, in order for me to be able to take you down that road you went down watching the movie, I would have to invest more time in the characters in the beginning. So you understand Paula's journey, so you understand what Omar is trying to do. And eventually, once I get the love story and the story of flawed characters on screen, then I could turn the page and make you follow them and root for them and ultimately, you know, hope they survive.
I like that all the characters seem saved and doomed by their occupations. It's like Paula can't leave the story alone. You get a sports agent who's just like, can't have cops in here. You know what I mean? Like every step along the way where it would have been better, it's something about the person's inherent, you know, what they're interested in, profession. Talk to me a little bit about getting this movie made, because we write a lot at the site and we talk a lot about the changing sort of nature of the filmmaking business, and this is a theatrically released thriller with Paula Patton, but you're still working within a budget. So tell me a little bit about the process of getting this movie made and what it's like for you right now, at once with all the different options that are open to filmmakers, but also probably like some new obstacles and hurdles that I don't even know about.
Right. Well, it's tough. I mean, you know, any independent artist, whatever it is you do, if you're trying to create a startup company, right? You're trying to do this business, which you guys have done incredibly well. It's going to always have, you know, ups and downs and things you have to actually fight against. You know what I mean? And independent film is no different. You have to raise your capital. Then you have to be, you know, work within a budget. So this movie, you know, was a micro budget movie, which means that you absolutely are shooting, you're strapped. There is no big checks being cut. You know what I mean? There is no tomorrow. It's extremely hard. And what you have to do is try to get yourself around people that could believe and trust in the process and want to be there to be there. Because if they're not, then they're going to ultimately not help you do what you're trying to do. Yeah,
you need kind of like a level of commitment.
You
that
have
I believe,
to. You have to have, because here's the thing. It's like when you're scrapping, man, and you're on the ground, you know, it's like you and your producers here on this show, right? You might have to work 16 hours today. You can't have a guy like, man, I only signed up for 8.
That is actually, Zach Mack, our producer, is actually the king of, you know, I've got a tea time at 3 o'clock, so I'm out.
That's hilarious. No, but it's that situation. Yeah. And movie making is no different, and you need to have the actors on the same accord. And, you know, I grew up playing basketball my whole life, and I love the term gym rat. And when you're a gym rat, that means you're not doing it for a check. That means you're not doing it for the girls, right?
Yeah.
You're doing it because you love the game. So I'm in there shooting jump shots at 13, 14 years old for, you know, 6, 7. I'm in there until my mom said, you got to come home.
So with that in mind, without giving away plot points necessarily, but just for my own edification, what was a more challenging sequence to shoot? The car chase or the nighttime sort of confrontation between the two? When they first come to the house, they send the girl to go get the phone. You know, like I'm curious because I'm like, you must be on the clock to be able to make stuff done.
Every time. What I think was
that's a pretty good car chase too.
It was really cool, man. I'm so excited about that. Like I'm so excited about that. Yeah, it was cool, man. I like the energy of it. It was great. It was just enough time for independent film. It felt big. The I think the night would have been a lot harder than that, just because I had the privilege of working with Dante Spinotti.
I was just going to bring him up.
Who's been nominated for multiple Academy Awards and
Shot Heat.
Yeah. Shot The Insider.
Yeah.
L.A. Confidential, right? And this was a special time in the movie. And what happens is the movie goes from, it transitions in that very moment you just said, from a regular thriller to a thriller noir, right? So we go now into, that whole sequence is lit by car headlights.
Yep.
And dust particles.
Yeah, that light, when the lights go on,
it's
great.
Incredible.
Yeah,
man. It's incredible. It's my favorite scene in the movie. Because you go, oh, like I love watching the audience when it goes, and everyone's going, oh, what just happened? And it's like, oh man, the movie just changed.
Yeah.
And from that point on, that is what happens. The movie gets squeezed down, the lighting goes away, and now the forest is lit by headlights, the cabin is lit by a little dome light, the car is lit by moonlight. So you go from these beautiful, big, wide, beautiful shots, scenic vistas, to this. And that by far, took Dante a while to place cars and get things settled, because that had to be exactly right for that to hit and the girl to run right into that light, which is really, really cool. So
this movie's obviously just coming out. It seems like you're somebody who has a lot of stuff. You got a lot of pots on the stove at once. What's next for you? Like, can you talk about like maybe some other stuff that you're working on? Yeah, I have another film, which I'm really excited about, called Motivated Seller. Oh yeah, I was reading about this. Yeah, with Michael Ealy, Megan Good, and Dennis Quaid. Yeah. It's a real thriller. Like, this is, this Traffik has an incredible message. This is the one where I was like, all right, let's just make a thriller. Yeah. And this one sounds a little bit like it's like Pacific Heights, like 90s thriller kind of thing. Yeah, right? This is a sick one here, man. Yeah, this one will have you like, oh my God, what just happened? Yeah. And that's a really good one. Dennis Quaid sells Michael Ealy and Megan Good a house, like a really big house up in Napa. And they're excited to buy this house. And he's motivated. He's looking for the right couple to buy the house, and because it's been in his family for 100 years, and now he's too old to take care of it. And they buy it, they hug him, kiss him goodbye, and then they realize he never leaves the house. Oh no! Oh no! You're not doing a great job of selling me on Northern California. Oh, it's great, man. Between human trafficking and Dennis Quaid trapping me in a Napa house. It's great. I don't know. Deon Taylor, thank you so much for coming by The Watch, man. Good luck with everything. Thank you so much, man.